Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. My name is Lindy Shering and today I will be presenting our scoping review titled The Motivations of Individuals and Families Who Foster or Adopt a Child Living with a Disability. This work explores the powerful question of why individuals and families choose to care for some of the most vulnerable children in our society, those living with disabilities. We begin with a persistent global challenge, and to start, I'd like to position this study within a broader global context, one that presents a persistent and pressing challenges for both policymakers and communities. Across industrialised Western nations, and indeed many parts of the world, we are witnessing a troubling imbalance. The number of children requiring foster or adoptive care continues to outpace the number of available carers. And this is not a new issue, but it is an intensifying one, exacerbated by socio-economic pressures, systemic inequalities, and in many cases, insufficient support structures for carers themselves. Within this already strained system, children living with disabilities face an even greater disadvantage. Research consistently shows that they are disproportionately represented in the child protection system. This overrepresentation signals deeper issues, both structural and cultural, that affect how disability is understood, supported and accommodated within foster care frameworks. Compounding this, these children are significantly more likely to experience placement breakdowns. The lack of disability-informed support, coupled with limited access to specialist care, means that placements often fail, and not because of a lack of love or good intentions, but due to systemic gaps in training, resources, and long-term support. And when placements fail repeatedly, the outcomes are severe. Many of these children face the very real risk of institutionalisation, a pathway that we know is associated with lifelong impacts on social, emotional and developmental well-being. So in this complex and urgent landscape, my research asks, who are the individuals and families who choose to foster children living with a disability? What motivates them? How do they navigate the unique socialisation challenges that these children face in care? So the question becomes, who steps forward to care for these children and why? Having outlined the broader context, let's now consider why motivation is such a critical area of focus in this field. Firstly, we know that motivation plays a foundational role in recruitment. Understanding what drives individuals to step forward as foster or adoptive carers directly informs the effectiveness of recruitment campaigns and policy design. When we understand the why, we can begin to tailor messages, incentives, and support structures that actually speak to potential carers. But motivation doesn't just matter at the point of entry. It has a profound impact on placement stability. Carers who are intrinsically motivated, who feel a strong personal or moral commitment, are often better equipped to navigate the complex challenges that can emerge, especially when caring for a child with high or additional needs. Motivation sustains resilience in the face of behavioural difficulties, medical needs, or strained relationships within systems. Thirdly, motivation is closely tied to long-term retention. One of the most consistent findings in the literature is that foster carers who feel a strong sense of purpose and alignment with their caregiving role are significantly more likely to stay in the system, even when support is limited or stress is high. However, and this is the critical gap, while we are having a growing body of research exploring care and motivation generally, there remains a stark underrepresentation of studies focused specifically on those who foster or adopt children with disabilities. This group is unique. They are caring for children who require not only additional emotional and physical support, but often complex structural advocacy. Their motivations may differ in subtle but significant ways from the general carer population, and we need to understand those differences if we are to build a system that truly supports and retains them. This brings us to the central question that underpins this study. What motivates individuals and families from industrialised Western countries to care for a non-biological child living with a disability? This question sits at the intersection of three complex realities. First, the ongoing shortage of carers. Second, the overrepresentation of children with disabilities in care. And third, the unique and often unacknowledged challenges faced by those who choose to care for these children. Importantly, this question is framed to explore motivation not in abstract terms, but in the real-world context of caregiving. It asks, what compels someone to say yes, to step forward and embrace a role that is profoundly rewarding and at times incredibly demanding? By focusing on industrialised Western countries, the study considers environments where formal foster and adoption systems are established, but where individual carers often operate under increasing bureaucratic and emotional strain. These systems may offer financial subsidies or training, but they also reflect broader societal assumptions about disability, caregiving, and what constitutes family. And by specifying non-biological caregiving, the question deliberately includes both foster and adoptive carers, acknowledging that the act of choosing to care for a child with a disability often offers a unique window into human motivation, resilience, and often compassion-driven activism. This question guided the scoping review methodology and informed the inclusion criteria, ensuring that what emerged was not just a catalogue of findings, but a meaningful synthesis of what is known and what remains largely unexplored. Before turning to the findings, it's important to clarify the key definitions and outline the methodology that structured this scoping review. In this study, the term child refers to any individual under the age of 18. This aligns with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and ensures consistency across diverse international policy frameworks. Disability was defined broadly to include intellectual, developmental, physical, and multiple disabilities. This inclusive definition allowed for the capture of a wide range of studies, reflecting the complex and intersecting needs of children living with disability in care settings. Methodologically, this review followed Arksey and O'Malley's scoping review framework, which is well established for mapping key concepts in emerging or under-researched areas. To ensure transparency and rigour, the review process was also guided by the PRISMA SCR checklist, which provided a structured approach to reporting. 3 major databases were searched: CINAHL, PubMed, and PsycInfo, and these were chosen to reflect a multidisciplinary scope covering nursing, allied health, medicine, psychology, and social science literature. The inclusion criteria were clearly defined. Studies needed to be peer-reviewed, published in English and dated between 2000 and 2024, and focused specifically on industrialised Western countries, a context where formal foster and adoption systems operate under comparable economic and policy conditions. Following a systematic screening, 10 studies were ultimately included in the final review. While this number might seem small, it reflects a limited volume of focused research in the area, and it highlights the need for more sustained attention to the motivation of those who care for children with disabilities outside of biological kinship ties. Here the PRISMA diagram gives a visual overview of the article selection process, helping to illustrate both the scope and the rigour of this review. We began with an initial pool of articles identified through systematic searching across the 3 major databases, and as you can see, that generated a considerable number of records. What followed was a multi-stage screening process, removing duplicates, applying inclusion and exclusion criteria, and reviewing full text to ensure that only the most relevant and high-quality studies were included. Each step in this flowchart represents a deliberate narrowing, filtering studies that did not meet the criteria, whether because they focused on non-Western contexts or did not include children with disabilities or lacked a focus on carer motivation. And in the end, just 10 studies remained. This final number reflects a telling gap in the literature. While the broader field of foster and adoptive care is relatively well explored, studies that focus specifically on the motivations of those caring for children with disabilities remain few and far between. So rather than just being a technical diagram, this Prisma chart quietly reinforces the central point of the review, and it's not just what was included that matters, but what was missing. Once the final 10 studies were selected, a structural data extraction process was undertaken to ensure consistent analysis across a diverse set of research design and context. The first element we extracted was the type of care, and this included foster care, adoption, and in a smaller number of studies, respite care. The inclusion of different caregiving arrangements allowed for a more nuanced understanding of how motivation may vary across short-term, long-term, and permanent care settings. Next, we considered country and cultural contexts. While all studies came from industrialised Western nations, there were still meaningful variations. Studies spanned across the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, and Scandinavia, each offering different policy frameworks, support systems, and cultural attitudes toward both disability and out-of-home care. This variation adds richness to the findings while also making space for potential cross-cultural insights. Thirdly, we extracted details on the study design and methodology, and they range from qualitative interviews and thematic analysis to large-scale surveys and mixed method studies. This diversity of methods meant the motivations identified were drawn from both carers' lived experience and broader demographic trends. The fourth category focused on specificity to disability. Some studies look broadly at children with special needs, while others focus specifically on intellectual, developmental, or physical disabilities. This helped clarify whether motivation was framed in general terms or if it was directly linked to caring for a child with a particular diagnosis or support need. Finally, and most critically, we extracted the stated motivations to care. These were coded thematically and compared across studies to identify patterns, both common threads and divergent reasons. These motivations form the core of the findings I'll present shortly, as they offer valuable insight into what drives people to care for children with disability, despite the added complexity such care often involves. The data analysis revealed 4 core themes that emerge consistently across the 10 studies, each offering insights into the complex motivation behind fostering or adopting a child with a disability. First, altruism and the desire to help vulnerable children. This was the most consistently reported motivator. Many carers described a strong internal drive to make a difference in a child's life, particularly for those who were perceived to be overlooked, rejected, or in need of specialised care. This motivation often stemmed from a deep sense of social justice or moral responsibility. Some participants expressed it simply as someone has to help, so why not me? Second, commitment to caring for children with a disability. What stood out in several studies was not just a general willingness to care, but a deliberate choice to foster or adopt a child with a disability. For some carers, this was linked to previous professional experience in disability. For others, it arose from personal familiarity, such as having a family member with a disability. In these cases, motivation was shaped by confidence in their ability to meet the child's needs, and often by a desire to challenge social stigma around disability. Thirdly, personal values and beliefs, including religion and spirituality. For many participants, caring for a child with a disability was deeply aligned with their personal value system. Faith-based motivations were particularly prominent in North American studies, where participants cited their religious convictions as central to their decision. Beyond religion, carers also referred to broader ethical beliefs such as compassion, fairness, and the importance of giving back. And finally, mutual benefit and family enrichment. This theme reflects a recognition that caregiving can be deeply rewarding, and not just for the child, but for the carer and their family. Some carers spoke about the joy, personal growth, and sense of purpose they experience through fostering or adoption. Others highlighted the positive impact on their own children, who developed empathy and maturity through growing up alongside a sibling with a disability. Together, these 4 themes demonstrate that motivation is not singular or simplistic. It is layered, deeply personal, and often tied to both individual experience and broader social or moral worldviews. To deepen our understanding of the findings, we drew on 3 theoretical frameworks that help make sense of the motivation expressed by carers across the study. First, self-determination theory, developed by Ryan and Decci. This theory distinguishes between intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, both of which were evident in the studies. Intrinsic motivations include a sense of purpose, compassion, or personal fulfillment. Extrinsic motivations, while less dominant, also played a role, such as religious duty, community recognition, or even financial stability in some cases. The key insight here is that many carers operate from a blend of motivations that are both inwardly driven and shaped by external factors. Secondly, Bandura's social cognitive theory. This theory highlights the importance of observational learning, role modelling, and self-efficacy. In several studies, carers reported that they were influenced by the actions of others, friends, relatives, mentors, or people in their faith communities who had modelled fostering or adoption. Seeing others successfully care for children with disabilities gave them the confidence and belief that they too could take on this role. This sense of vicarious experience and social reinforcement was an important motivational trigger. And third, the resource exchange theory proposed by Fowa and Fowa. This framework views caregiving as a relational exchange, not in a transactional sense, but in terms of giving and receiving different types of resources. Many carers felt they had emotional, spiritual, or psychological resources to offer, and saw caregiving as a meaningful way to give those resources where they were most needed. In turn, they also spoke of receiving intangible rewards like love, connection, spiritual growth, or personal healing. Together, these theories help to frame motivation not as a single static driver, but as a dynamic and multifaceted process shaped by internal beliefs, social influences, and the perceived resources that individuals bring to the caregiving role. So what do these findings mean in practice, particularly for those involved in recruiting foster and adoptive carers? First, the data suggests that recruiting efforts can be strengthened by appealing directly to altruistic motivations. Many carers were drawn to the role by a desire to help a vulnerable child, so messaging that highlights the real-world impact of caregiving and the difference carers can make in a child's life is likely to resonate deeply. Second, several studies showed that religion and spirituality were powerful motivators, particularly in faith-based communities. This presents a valuable opportunity for agencies to partner with churches and faith-based organisations where the values of compassion and service and social responsibility naturally align with the goals of foster and disability care. Thirdly, normalising disability care is essential. Too often, prospective carers view disability as something beyond their capacity. But when carers see peers successfully navigating this space through storytelling, testimonials, or public-facing campaigns, it helps demystify the role. Peer modelling, as supported by social cognitive theory, becomes a key recruitment tool. Finally, reframing the narrative around family enrichment can shift perceptions. Rather than presenting fostering as a sacrifice, it can be communicated as an opportunity for growth, connection, and mutual benefit. When carers see that their experience can enrich not only the child's life, but their own, recruitment messaging becomes more hopeful and affirming. Taken together, these strategies move us away from deficit-based messaging towards a strength-based, values-driven approach, one that acknowledges both the challenge and the deep reward of caring for a child with a disability. Once carers enter the system, motivation alone isn't enough to sustain them through the complexities of raising a child with a disability. Targeted retention strategies are crucial, and these too can be shaped by an understanding of the different motivational drivers. For altruistic carers, one of the most important supports is recognition and feedback. Many of these individuals are motivated by the desire to make a difference, but without visible impact or affirmation, burnout can quickly follow. Simple interventions like regular updates on the child's progress, personalised feedback, or public acknowledgement can help maintain their sense of purpose. Carers who demonstrate a strong commitment to disability care, especially those with lived or professional experience, often want to do the job well. For them, access to specialised training, respite care, and ongoing emotional support is essential. This group is typically willing to engage deeply, but they must be resourced appropriately to continue. When carers are motivated by religious or spiritual values, faith-aligned communities of practice can provide emotional grounding and a sense of belonging, whether through church-based support groups or spiritually informed mentoring. These spaces allow carers to process their experiences in a way that resonates with their belief. And finally, those drawn by the promise of mutual benefit and family enrichment need whole-of-family support structures. This includes not only counselling and peer support for carers, but also dedicated sibling programs to ensure that all family members feel included, valued, and supported throughout the caregiving journey. By aligning support systems with the motivations that bring carers into the space, we improve not only retention, but outcomes for children as well. As with any scoping review, it's important to acknowledge the limitations of this study and the current state of the field. Firstly, only 10 studies met the strict inclusion criteria. While this may seem limited in number, it reflects the specificity and focus of the research question. Centred on motivation, non-biological caregiving, disability, and industrialised Western contexts, the narrow scope was intentional, but it naturally reduced the pool of eligible literature. Secondly, most of the included studies were based in the United States. There were comparatively fewer from Australia, the UK, or Europe. This geographic skew means that findings may be shaped by policy and cultural landscape of the US, which can differ significantly from other Western nations. It also points to a gap, particularly in Australian research, where further inquiry is clearly needed. Thirdly, not all of the studies focused exclusively on disability. In some cases, motivation was discussed in relation to broader special needs or mixed care populations. As a result, the data had to be carefully extracted and interpreted to ensure it remained relevant to the disability-specific focus of the review. And finally, this review reflects a field that is still relatively underdeveloped. There is a growing awareness of the unique needs and strength of carers supporting children with disabilities, but there remains a pressing need for more targeted, disability-specific research, particularly in contexts outside the US, and especially from the voices of carers themselves. These limitations don't diminish the value of the findings, but rather they highlight just how necessary further research in this area truly is. As this review makes clear, while we've started to uncover the motivations of those who care for children with disabilities, there's still so much more to explore. And these questions are not just academic, they have real-world implications for recruitment, training, placement, and retention. One important avenue is to explore how motivation changes over time. Most studies capture carers' motivations at a single point, often before or just after placement, but we know that motivation can evolve. Longitudinal research could help us understand how carers' reasons for staying shift, deepen, or diminish across the caregiving journey. Second, there's a clear need to investigate cultural variations in motivation. The majority of this existing research is Western and often white-centric. Understanding how motivation is shaped by cultural norms, family structures, or community expectations will be critical in diversifying and strengthening the carer pool. Thirdly, we need to work more on kinship and respite carers. Much of the existing literature focuses on non-relative long-term placement, yet kinship carers make up a significant proportion of carers, particularly in Indigenous and marginalised communities. And respite carers play a vital role in supporting placement stability, but their motivations are virtually unexamined. Fourth, we should be asking, how does motivation affect placement stability? Are certain types of motivation more predictive of positive outcomes or more vulnerable to burnout? Answering this could lead to better matching and earlier intervention. And finally, this brings us to a more applied research goal. the effective matching of carers and children based on motivational profiles. If we understand what drives someone to care and what sustains them, we can design systems that connect carers with children in ways that are not only practical but meaningful and enduring. These are the kinds of questions that can move the field forward, not just in theory but in practice. As I bring this presentation to a close, I want to pause on this final thought. Foster and adoptive carers of children with disabilities are often described as extraordinary. And in many ways they are. They take on challenges that many would shy away from, and they do so with strength, compassion, and resilience. But what struck us most in reviewing these studies was how ordinary their motivations are. Love, purpose, faith, family, a desire to help. These are not unreachable ideals. They are deeply human values that many of us share. And that's precisely why this work matters. Because if we can truly understand these motivations and nurture them, then we can build systems that don't just recruit carers but sustain them. Systems that offer not only support but dignity, not only guidance but gratitude. And in doing so, we don't just support the ones who step forward, we support the children who wait. Thank you.